I'd like to commence my contribution as somebody who's worked with the Health Service over the last 4 years in my role as spokesperson by acknowledging the heroes in our country, the health workers, who will be our heroes in the coming days, weeks and months, and also to acknowledge their representative bodies and unions who have all behaved in such a responsible manner, and also the 30,000 people who volunteered and the emergency services. We are a resilient country, and over the next few months we're going to show that once more. And we also need to remember that politics has to work. Our country is in a situation where we're in an emergency, and politics has to work across all sides of this House. And it is working. It is working across us all. I want to acknowledge the speech made by the Taoiseach on Patrick's Night. But bearing that in mind, when it comes to politics, I also want to quote Michael Ryan, a fellow Irishman who's the Executive Director of on the Health Emergencies Programme. He said, quote, "If you need to be right before you move, you will never win. Perfection is the enemy of the good when it comes to emergency management. Speed trumps perfection. The greatest error is not to move." And I think we need to bear that in mind today as we go through all what we have to do for the people of this country. I want to raise a number of issues which will not be covered by this legislation, which I want to put on the record so that the government can look at them, possibly not in a perfect way given everything that's going on, but there are issues that do need to be dealt with. When it comes to the issue of people who are renting Taoiseach and government, we need solutions quickly. And the solutions that are going to be proposed, which I understand they are, need to actually not push off rent. They need to freeze rents, which I know is constitutionally allowable. I sat there, I got the advice, I have the advice. But also, they need to ensure that people who are renting don't have a debt crystallised. This is not like dealing with mortgages. The debt cannot be crystallised. It cannot be pushed off. They can't pay it. So the state has to intervene. I can't be any clearer than that. And that is what has to happen in the coming days and weeks. When it comes to the payment, the COVID payment, pandemic unemployment payment, a couple of anomalies need to be dealt with. Where employers actually want to top up the payment, we need to ensure that that can be done. And that if somebody is actually temporarily unemployed, any top-ups doesn't become technically a taxable gift under taxation law. This can be amended next week, Taoiseach, so please do so. Also, in relation to the pandemic payment, we need to ensure that we're at risk of a perverse incentive. So we have to agree that if any employer agrees to pay some or part of any employee's wages while they are laid off, that this should be incentivised rather than penalised. We need to ensure there isn't a perverse logic here. When it comes to the banks and mortgages, I was not happy that the Banking Federation came into the Minister rather than the Minister going to the Banking Federation. And I also believe we have to ensure that all other lending institutions, obviously, who are dealing with a proportion of the people in this country, that they come under the same conditions as what was prescribed yesterday with the main banks. We cannot have a situation where there are people left outside the conditions. So regulatory process needs to kick in and kick in pretty quickly. Furthermore, Taoiseach, we also need to deal with a whole range of other issues. We need to ensure that those who are the credit unions of Ireland, that they actually can allow smaller payments to be paid by those who are contributing, and that they will not have an impact. It will not have an impact on their financial situation with the central bank because they are showing some compassion to those who are borrowing money from them. In relation to healthcare workers, we, once and for all, collectively need to make sure that all healthcare workers have the proper PPE. It is not acceptable. We cannot have two tiers in relation to how we protect our workers. And this is an issue I've been working on for over a week now across the board to try and ensure we have the same standard across geographically, public and private. We cannot have our workers put at risk. We need utility bills, utility payments, that all utility operators are treating their customers in a fair fashion. And if that needs regulatory change, if that needs intervention from government, please do so. We need to ensure that Stamp 1 and 2 who have, for non-EU migrants, that all of those who are in that position, we need to consider what payments are going to be made to them to ensure that they don't fall below the poverty line. We need to look at the duration of residency permits Taoiseach. We don't need a scenario where down in Borough Key or at Garda stations we have thousands of people queuing up over the coming months to get that dealt with. So we need to push those out. We need to look at business insurance to ensure that if some schedules do not include such illnesses as this, that businesses aren't going to close down or be hugely affected. I presume the business that the insurance industry has been called in by the Minister for Business. We need to ensure that there isn't gouging going on when it comes to the issue of accommodation and student accommodation across the country, where people have paid up now for 6 months but won't be using the accommodation. And finally, three more things. Can we bring in legislation to ensure that when it comes to contact tracing, Taoiseach, that we can use mobile phone data? We know there are issues before the courts. This is critically important. We need to use mobile phone data potentially for contact tracing, so can we deal with that? Finally, the elderly are very concerned in relation to a number of issues. Let's make their life easier. So when it comes to the issue of new driver's licence, when it comes to the issue of NCTs, can we push those off for a period of time to facilitate them? And finally, when it comes to the Leave Insert, I'm glad the Minister made his announcements in the last couple of hours, but surely as a society and as a country, we can logistically ensure that those who are worried about doing their Leave Insert will be able to do so across this country. We have the time to do that.